Welcome everyone, this is Mr. Yu with another video that goes over some of the concepts that we're learning in the algebra class that I'm teaching. It's an 8th grade algebra class, Algebra 1, and right now we're solving equations with variables on both sides. We're using the distributive property along with the idea of collecting like terms and clearing denominators. You can see in problems 1 and 2 here that we've got a distributive property in use, and then we also have like terms that we have to use. And then in problems 9 and 10 you can see that we've got denominators that we have to clear in order to turn these back into integer type equations. So we'll go ahead and get started with problem number 1. I'll go ahead and zoom in so we can see things a little bit better. And the distributive property means that we take the number that's on the outside of the parentheses and we multiply it to the numbers on the inside of the parentheses. So this negative 4 has to go to the 8x, so that would be a negative 32x, and then a negative 4 has to times a positive 2, that will give me a negative 8. Now the idea of collecting like terms is we look for terms on the right hand side. You can see there's the equal sign and we have two terms that are identical. And what I mean by terms is they have the variable that's exactly the same, and both variables have the same exponent. So what that means is I can add the numbers in front. So if I take a negative 5 and add a negative 4, that will give me a negative 9x. And then the 84 just comes forward. From there you can see that I've simplified everything. I've collected like terms. The parentheses are gone. So now I need to start reversing my addition and subtraction. So let's look at the x terms. If I look at a negative 9x and I look at a negative 32, the negative 32 is smaller of the two, so that's the one that I want to vanish away. And what I mean by vanishing, getting it to vanish, is I want it to go to 0, so I only have the negative 8 over here. So I put a 0 there, and then I ask myself, what do I do at a negative 32 to get it to go to 0? Well, I'm going to add 32x. Well, if I add 32x there, then I have to do it to the other side, because one principle in algebra is if I do something to one side, I have to do it to the other to keep the equation balanced. Well, that's gone. So what I'm left with is the negative 8 comes forward. I don't do anything to that yet. I take a negative 9 and add 32. That will give me 23x. And then the 84 just comes forward. Now you can see when I'm doing algebra, if I go from one step to the next step, from here to there, and then the next step is from that equation to this one, you can see that my equation gets a little bit easier to understand and less numbers. It gets shorter, and that always is a good indication that you're doing your problem correctly. Now for the next step, I have to concentrate on the side that has the x variable. Sometimes your x may be over here on the left hand side, but on this equation we've got it on the right. So I look at the right hand side because it has the x variable, and I see what number is on the same side as that variable. Well, it's that positive 84. I want it to vanish away, so what I'm going to do is subtract it away to get it to go to 0. So if I do it to this side, I do it to the other side. And then I get a negative 92. This goes away, and then I have 23x. So now do you see from that next step, it comes a little bit simpler. Where I had 3 terms, now I only have 2, one on each side. So now I have a negative 92 equals 23x. And I know this needs to be 1x on this side. So if I look at 1x, how do I get that 23 to be a 1? Well, I know that 23 divided by 23 is 1. So to get that 23 to become a 1, I divide it to here. And then again, the basic law of algebra says if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. That becomes a 1. 1x is the same as x. So now if I take a negative 92 and I divide it by 3, let's see what I get. Divided by 23, I get and negative 4. So that's my solution. X is a negative 4. Okay, it finishes for problem number 1. So remember to use the distributive property correctly, and also remember to collect like terms. The other main idea along with algebra is from one step to the next step. Your equation should always get easier to manipulate and easier to use. So we'll go ahead and start problem number 10 here in just a second. Okay, now we're on problem number 10, and if you look at this problem here, you can see that we're dealing with denominators. We've got a 4, really there's a 1 underneath the 7 that we usually don't write, and then we've got a 3 and a 2. And to be able to do denominators, we have to find a common denominator. So if I take a look at all this, I've got 4 times 3 equals 12. I know that 1 times 12 will give me a 12, and then I also know that 2 times 6 will give me a 12. So what I'm going to use for my denominator, I'm going to rewrite each one of these terms, and I'm going to use a 12 as the denominator. So let me go ahead and erase this. So let's take a look at 3/4. I've got a negative 3 over 4 x minus 7 over 1. Again, I'm writing the 1 here. We usually don't write 7 over 1, but I'm doing it so I know what the denominator is. And then 4/3 x plus 5 1/2. And I want to write 5 1/2 as an improper fraction. So I'm going to take 2 times the 5. That gives me 10. So I know that 10 halves is the same as 5, and then I'm going to add the 1/2 to it. So this 5 1/2 is the same as 11 1/2. So now I've got everything like I want it. So I want to remember to write that as an improper fraction, and I want to write that with a denominator. Then I can see what I need to do to each denominator to get it to be a 12. So if you remember from before, we know that to get 12, 4 to equal 12, I can times it by 3. So if I do it to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. To get 1 times 12 is 12, so I'm going to multiply the bottom by 12 and then the top by 12. The 3 I will multiply by 4, so I do the top by 4, and then the 2 I multiply the bottom by 2, then the top, or the bottom by 6, and then the top by 6. Now you can see all these denominators here on the bottom are going to be 12. There's a 12, there's a 12, there's a 12, there's a 12. So now, because I'm dealing with an equation and because I have all my denominators 12, that means I can just focus on my numerators, and I'm going to drop my denominators. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have a negative 3 times 3 will give me a negative 9x. Move that negative up there where I can see it. And then a negative 7 times 12 is a negative 84. And then 4 times 4 is 16x. And then 11 times 6 is a positive 66. So again, from what we talked about in number 2, when I do go from one step to the next step, which was clearing my denominator, it should always make my equation a lot simpler. And does it look a lot easier to deal with? Yes, it does. So I multiply the top and the bottom by 3, top and the bottom by 12, by 4, and by 6, and that allows me to drop my denominator. So now for the next step of the equation, I need to get rid of the negative 9. The negative 9 is smaller than 16, so I'm going to add 9 to each side. That negative 9 plus 9 will get it to go to 0 there. Add 9 over here. That gives me 25x. And then the negative 84 just comes forward. And the 66 just comes forward. So do you see, again, my equation has just got a lot easier. I've dropped the negative 9x term. Now we're almost done. Let me rewrite this up here and we'll start our next step. Now the term that has the side that has the x term on it, x term, is the right hand side. So that means I want to get rid of the 66. Positive 66, to get it to go back to 0, I'm going to subtract 66. And then I have to do it to the other side to keep the equation balanced. So negative 84 minus 66 will give me a negative 150. And then the 25x just comes forward. Now again, I want the 25x to become a 1. So I know that 25 over 25 is 1. So if I wrote 25 on the bottom there, I have to write it over here. That's division, isn't it? So if I take my calculator, don't see it down there at the bottom, but if I take the calculator, I get negative 4 and negative 6 equals x. So that's our solution there. So when we are dealing with fractions, we want to make sure that we always write any whole number that we've got, just any integer, make sure we show that we've got a 1 on the bottom, and any mixed numbers we want to change to improper fractions. Once we do that step, we want to make sure that we write everything with a common denominator, and then the next step is we can drop that denominator and we'll always end up with a nice integer equation, which is, from there, it's pretty simple to solve. So that concludes this video. I appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions, just feel free to email me. Thanks.